time to start. So I hope you have the photograph. So it's a kind of scenarios or cases. So there are kind of from back page. So one is for today and the other is for Monday. I hope you, or some of you have your laptops together. So for Monday, I think it would be very good if you have a copy of Article 25 and Article 28 of the ICC statute, because that would be very important in order to discuss the different kind of scenarios. Because I think it's better if you do it through cases than just me telling you what to think. And the same for today, which is about the crimes against humanity. So as I said, that crimes against humanity, they were in the Nuremberg Tribunal Charter. There is no kind of treaty for crimes against humanity. Now the International Law Commission is preparing, is considering the reports for kind of proposing to states a treaty for crimes against humanity. But for the moment there is no treaty, and the crimes against humanity that have been of course formulated in the ICTY, ICTR Charter, and also in the statute for the International Criminal Court. So it's a kind of, if you like, customary international law now, the definition of crimes against humanity, but there isn't any treaty. Now the differences between the formulation of crimes against humanity in the ICC Charter and in the ICTR, ICTY, and of course going back to the Nuremberg Charter, is that in Nuremberg the crimes against humanity were linked to war, because of course there were as such before crimes against humanity, but a lot of bad things were happening during wars, so they're linked to war. Nowadays they are not linked to war, so the ICC statute does not link crimes against humanity to war, but crimes against humanity can be committed during peacetime or during wartime. The ICTY, however, has linked crimes against humanity to war because it was following the Nuremberg precedent, and the ICTR did not, but they happen, during peace or wartime. And the other difference, or major difference, between, say, the Nuremberg Charter and the modern formulation of crimes against humanity, in particular the ICC one, is that they are not linked to a discriminatory intent. Okay. So in the Nuremberg Charter, they were linked to discriminatory intent. So you do all these bad acts because you want to target, discriminate against a certain people, right? The modern definition of crimes against humanity are not linked to discriminatory intent. It's only the crime against humanity of persecution which has a discriminatory intent. And of course, in that sense, there are some similarities with the crime of genocide, but the difference between the crime of genocide and the crime against humanity of persecution is that although there is discriminatory intent, there isn't any intent to destroy a certain group, one of the 4 groups that are in the definition of the crime of genocide. Okay, so you don't have the dolus specialis, you have only the discriminatory intent, so that's what you have. And also there's a wider definition of groups that are protected, whereas for genocide you have only 4 groups. For the crime against humanity persecution, you have more than 4 groups, and of course the definition is also open to include other groups. Crimes against humanity, they're formulated in which article in the ICC statute?
7.
It's Article 7. Do you have the copy of Article 7 in front of you? Some of you yes, others perhaps no. Okay. It is divided again. You have the actus reus and the mens rea. So the actus reus is one of these enumerated acts. How many? Sorry? Not 5. It's more than 5. 11. It's 11. So you have all these enumerated acts. And the important thing for crimes against humanity is that these acts, for example, murder, and murder is also crimes for genocide, they need to be committed against the background of widespread or systematic attacks against a civilian population with knowledge of the attack. So the first part of the definition of crimes against humanity constitutes what is said the chapeau or the context of crimes against humanity. Okay. And so what you need to prove, first of all, you need to prove that a particular person has committed, say, murder, so there was intent to commit murder. And also, you have to prove that the murder, the specific act, was committed as part of a widespread or systematic attacks, similar attacks, murders, persecutions, a lot of, nasty acts against a civilian population, and that the person knew that these attacks exist. Okay, in that case, the person would be prosecuted for the crime against humanity of murder. Right. The person is not prosecuted for the background widespread or systematic attacks. Okay. He's prosecuted or she's prosecuted for the specific act he or she is doing, but in order to be a crime against humanity, not to be murder, like a common crime of murder, it needs to be committed against this background attacks. Okay. So that's, if you like, the structure of crimes against humanity. And so what I'm going to do is, instead of going, we're going to go through the definitions, but from the photocopy you have, I would like to, it's very difficult to make groups here. Or do you think that you can work in groups? I think it's a bit difficult to do that. But what I would like you to do then, so we take the part which is dystopia, is a state, right? Okay, so if we read the first part, okay, dystopia is a state whose population is ethnic utopians, 40%, and ethnic dystopians, 60%. Extopia is a region. Do you have it in front of you? Extopia is a region where both utopians and dystopians live. There is tension between the two ethnic groups, and in a period of 2 months, the army and police killed 1,000 utopians all over the country. Okay. So this is just, I want to discuss whether this satisfies the chapeau or the contextual element of the definition of crimes against humanity. So I will give you kind of 5 minutes. See what Article 7 says, and then think about how things are interpreted in Article 7. So you have to consider how widespread is interpreted, how systematic is interpreted, how attack is interpreted, what's the civilian population for crimes against humanity is, and then we can discuss all these issues, and then you tell me whether perhaps the contextual element is satisfied or not. Okay, so 5 minutes, you can discuss with your colleagues, next to you. You can form your own groups, or you can just do it yourselves, like thinking. Okay, so 5 minutes. So what's your conclusion? Do you think it satisfies the chapeau, the contextual element of Article 7? And in what sense it satisfies the contextual element? So who wants to take the lead? Or do you want me to exercise my democratic prerogative and ask people? Do you need more time or what? There are any attacks which are either widespread or systematic against the civilian population. So, what's your verdict? I mean, if you were judges and there was a case like that, what would be your verdict?
Systematic attacks, because the army and police are involved. It's not like some ragtag group of mercenaries.
Good.
So it should attract crimes against humanity.
Okay, so you say it satisfies because it's systematic, it's not widespread. So then we're gonna explain, what's systematic, what's widespread, etc. You say there are attacks. Are there against the civilian population?
Yes, specifically people belonging to a particular ethnicity.
Okay.
That also falls within crimes against humanity.
Good. Okay. That's it. So we now kind of explain the chapeau of Article 7. Okay. It says it's about the background attacks. When it says attack, what does it mean? Is it attack like in a military sense, like attacking in a military sense is shooting someone, bombing someone, targeting someone? What is the meaning of attack in this sense, like for crimes against humanity?
Paragraph 2A would be an attack as defined under paragraph 2A, which is multiple commission of acts against the civilian population pursuant to or in furtherance of a state or organization policy to commit such attack.
Okay, yes. But what about the content of the attack? Is it like attacking using force against someone?
There are a bunch of acts referred to in enslavement or rape or torture or not necessarily force per se. It could be deprivation of the word.
Good. Yes. So it's not like military attack, use of force. Attack means any of the acts that are included in Article 7. So it's violations, say, of human rights in general, right? Or any other act within the jurisdiction of the ICC. Okay, so attacks are violations, if you like, of human rights, of people's human rights, and not military in that sense, okay, or use of force. It's not like humanitarian law attacks, targeting, okay? So violations of rights. Okay, that's the meaning of attacks. Either those included, any of those included, or a mixture, or a combination of those included in Article 7, or any other within the war crimes, for example. Any other included within the jurisdiction of the ICC. Now, these attacks should be widespread or systematic. Okay, this is rejected, one or the other. What does it mean, widespread? Attacks are widespread when? What does it mean?
They're against a large section of population or cover a large area.
Okay, so it has to do with the scale of the attack, okay, and the multiplicity of victims, or the number, if you like, the victims. Of course, everything is contextual, right? So you see what is targeted, all right? The scope, of course, can mean the area, right? But of course, the number of crimes you commit, okay? You commit killings, murders, rapes, imprisonment, whatever, right? But also the multiplicity or the number of victims, okay? So that's the meaning of widespread. What about systematic?
So this will be the qualitative element about having an organized chain of command of how to execute the crime.
Okay. Yes. So systematic means an organized, right? Which in effect, so the attacks are the violations. The attacks are organized. So in effect, it means that there is a machine behind that. Okay. It can be a state or anyone else. So it's a kind of, if you like, policy behind that. Now, your colleague, because mentioned the definition of attack, okay? So if you go down, so the elements of widespread or systematic are rejected. But if you go down Article 7 in paragraph 2, and your colleague said that there's a definition of attacks, and then it says that attacks directed against any civilian population means a course of conduct involving the multiple commission of acts, referred to in paragraph 1, etc., against any civilian population, pursuant to or in furtherance of a state or organizational policy to commit such attacks. So, the first part, it says attacks should be widespread or systematic, objective. The definition of the attack says that it's a multiple commission of acts, multiple commission, pursuant to or in furtherance of a state organizational policy. So the definition of the attack is conjunctive. Both need to be present. Do you think there's any contradiction there? The first part says widespread or systematic, either large scope or organization. The definition of the attack is multiple commission and organizational policy. So how you can kind of accommodate what appears to be widespread is high threshold, systematic is high threshold, and are disjunctive. Then definition of attack is low threshold multiplicity, kind of lower threshold organizational policy, but they are conjunctive. Okay. Now, the way you can satisfy, because the main issue about crimes or the concerns of states about crimes against humanity is not to include kind of crime waves, etc. Okay, within crimes against humanity. And therefore, it's always a question of whether there is a kind of organized or policy behind the commission of crimes against humanity. So the way you can, if you like, accommodate is that if you satisfy the high threshold of one criterion, for example, if the attacks are widespread, then you have to satisfy the lower threshold, in Article 2A, that there needs to be a kind of organizational policy. Right. If you satisfy the high threshold of organization, systematic, right, then you have to satisfy the lower threshold of multiplicity. So if you have a systematic attack against one person, it's not a crime against humanity, right? You need to have multiplicity of attacks, okay? So to avoid considering, crime waves, that it happens in every state, there's mafia or whatever it is, you do stuff, and also to avoid including one crime or two crimes, etc. So there needs to be both, to a certain extent, policy, but also a kind of multiplicity. Okay, so high threshold against low threshold. Okay, the way you can accommodate this definition. Now, when there's organizational policy, of course, sorry.
So, but if both the thresholds are like the definition given,
Sorry.
both the what you said to reconcile both of them, you need one higher threshold and one lower threshold, right?
Because there is always, there needs to be, as I said, some kind of policy, organized policy, and also some kind of multiplicity in order to have crimes against humanity. That's why if you satisfy a high threshold, say widespread, you need to satisfy also a kind of policy behind that. If you satisfy the high threshold of policy, you have to satisfy the low threshold of multiplicity, not widespread, but at least multiplicity. Okay, so to avoid including within the definition random attacks that happen in every state, that there is no policy, just happen. Okay, so
what I was asking is that even if both the thresholds are low, it will still be an attack under Article 7(2)(a), but it will not qualify as crime against humanity.
no, it has to be, it has to satisfy some, because the chapeau is disjunctive. It has to satisfy, the chapeau. Okay, it has to be either widespread or systematic, the background attack. Okay, so there needs to be background attacks that are either systematic or widespread. Right? These are disjunctive, so you have to satisfy that. But you need also, if you satisfy one of these criteria, you need to satisfy also some of the lower threshold criteria for the attack. Okay?
So you mean to say that in paragraph 2, all of the criterion are lower threshold criteria?
It's lower threshold criteria. Okay? So the requirement is that you satisfy the first part. The first part is disjunctive, widespread or systematic. Okay? And it's always a concern that there needs to be some organization and some kind of multiplicity, not one thing. So if you were going only for the widespread, then any kind of criminal wave, etc., that would be a crime against humanity. Right? It would satisfy the requirement for crime against humanity. Or any kind of mafia organized crime would be a crime against humanity because it's very, very well organized. Okay, that's why you need to satisfy also the lower threshold, which includes the multiplicity and also the kind of organizational Okay, it sounds that if you read them, they appear that they are contradictory. Okay, so that's the way you can satisfy them. Otherwise, you know, you can only do the first part and cause problems because states are not very happy with just either having to deal with crimes against humanity without any input or whatever happens in their state to claim that it's a crime against humanity. Okay, so that's a compromise between the two. And the organization should not be only the state. Okay, so crimes against humanity can be committed by organized groups, right? But the question here is what kind of organized groups, right? Because mafia may be organized, or any kind of criminal group may be organized. So what kind of organized groups they can commit crimes against humanity? It's groups that they look and behave like states. Okay, it's groups that, of course, they're organized, right? They have resources. They kind of control territory, because you cannot kind of commit crimes against humanity in this multiplicity attacks if you don't control some kind of territory and you have people. Okay.
So having territory is a prerequisite.
It's as I said, is like states. So organs, groups, etc., that they look like states. Okay. So if you have territory, if you are a non-state actor, and you have ISIS, for example, and you are a non-state actor and you have territory, then of course you control people. You have the resources. It's easier for you, okay, to commit crimes against humanity. Of course, you can take the old example of someone, you know, having an atomic bomb, etc., obliterating. Yes, it's a crime against humanity. It doesn't mean that it isn't, but it's not, for the moment, it's not the case that, you know, non-state groups, etc., you know, they can have all these facilities. So you need to be organized, you need to have the resources, you need to control territory in order to commit this kind of multiple attacks. Otherwise it can be a war crime, etc., something else. Okay. But for crimes against humanity is groups looking like a state. Because also the initial thing about crimes against humanity is that it is states commit crimes against humanity. Okay, so it started from states committing through their own organization, instigating and committing crimes against humanity. So widespread or systematic, with, as I said, depending on satisfying also the lower requirements. Attack, which is violation of human rights. So the attack needs to be directed against a civilian population. So the next question is, what is a civilian population?
So population that is largely non-combatant.
Okay.
In the sense that even if a certain population has a certain percentage of armed people, of people belonging to an armed force, that might still qualify as a civilian or a civilian population as a whole.
Okay. I think here we need to make a distinction between wartime, and peacetime. Okay. Now, crimes against humanity can be committed both in peacetime and in wartime. Now, in wartime, there is the principle of distinction, the distinction between civilians and combatants. Combatants, those, say, soldiers, etc., they can be targeted, and there's no crime is committed. They are legitimate targets. Okay, so to kill a soldier is you don't commit a crime. It's a legitimate target. And you have civilians. Okay, civilians should be protected. So if you attack civilians, that can be a war crime, but also can be a crime against humanity. For example, because it says that the attack should be directed against civilians. Directed means that civilians should be the primary aim of the attack. Now, if you, in a wartime, you always attack civilians, this is not anymore a war crime, it's a crime against humanity. Okay. There is, during wartime, of course civilians can die with what's called the collateral damage. So for example, if you target a military object, which is important for the military campaign, and there are civilians that may also be affected or killed because you're targeting this military object. If that is proportional to the aims you want to achieve and the importance of the target, then it's fine, it's lawful. Okay. So if this building is used for military purposes, and of course we are civilians, and if the enemy says, okay, it's a very important target, so if I destroy it, I get a military advantage, they can bomb it or whatever. We may die, but we are part of the proportionality calculus. They say, okay, 50 people, we are less today. I mean, we are 40, so even better. Well, if 40 people die against the military advantage of getting Kolkata, for example, the whole city, that's fine. And you have to take also precautions before you attack to avoid any collateral damage. Now, if you attack without calculating, measuring proportionality, without taking precautions, then it's not anymore a war crime, it's a crime against humanity. Okay. So there are overlaps, but to become a crime against humanity, it has to do with the widespread, because a war crime, killing one civilian that you shouldn't have killed, is a war crime, right? But for crimes against humanity, it's either the widespread or systematic, right? And civilians should be the primary target, okay? And as your colleague said, whether you are a civilian, of course you have this distinction, but even if you have army people, soldiers among the civilian population, does not, because you take the population as a whole, you don't see individual people, okay? So what is the population of, I don't know, this place, which is the kind of the target of the attack? You see it as a whole, right? Even if you have soldiers, to the extent that the soldiers are not combatants, they are what's called body combat, they are detained, they are injured, etc., you don't lose your status as civilians. And even if you have still active soldiers, you don't lose it, provided that the number is very small. Okay. During peacetime, you have this distinction between civilians and combatants during peacetime. We don't have it. Everyone is a civilian. Okay. So what about the army during peacetime, or the police during peacetime?
police will definitely be civilian because they are not military. As far as the army is concerned, at least they should be non-combatants because they are definitely not in a combatant mode.
Yeah. Okay, that's correct. So during peacetime, everyone is a civilian, and the army is civilians in uniform. Okay. So if there's an attack on the army in the barrack, for example, that's crime against humanity. Okay, it's not during peacetime. It's not justified. It's not war. Okay, it's not justified. Okay. If there is for war, I didn't mention the you have internal, non-international armed conflicts. Okay, so for like civil war. Okay, for civil wars, the army is not a civilian, they're combatants. And as far as the rebels or whatever, so in a non-international conflict, you don't have the distinction between combatants and civilians, right? In principle. But the army is considered to be combatants, and the kind of late interpretation of the law from members of the armed group that fights, say, the government, are considered to be combatants. So you can legitimately target them. So you don't commit either a war crime or a crime against humanity. Okay. So that's the definition of civilians. Now, the next thing is that the attack should be the so there is a background attack, and then you do a specific act, say a murder, but your murder should be part of a widespread or systematic attack. So it should be part of this background attack. What does it mean to be part of a widespread or systematic attack? Because things happen during, crimes against humanity. So you have all these things happening, and then someone just goes and goes, into a house to steal. Or, and by the way, there's resistance or whatever, kills a person. Okay, that's murder, right? Is that murder a crime against humanity, the crime against humanity of murder? So you have all these kind of background attacks on civilians, and someone just goes, as always it happens, they can steal, they can do things, but does it mean that if you have this background, widespread or systematic attacks, anything that happens is a crime against humanity, or it can be a kind of common crime, robbery, theft, murder like a common murder, not a crime against humanity. So you have to prove that it is part of a widespread or systematic attack. So what does it mean to be part of? How you prove it? What do you have to do? So, yeah.
So it would depend on the knowledge of the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
If the perpetrator commits one of the acts enumerated in Article 7 with the knowledge of the background, the context, then it would qualify as a crime against humanity. However, something like a robbery, which is any act which is not enumerated,
Okay,
ideally.
there are two things here. What you said is correct. So the person does it with the knowledge, but then there is also the objective thing that this specific act is part of the widespread or systematic. Now, with regard to the knowledge that your colleague mentioned, yes, you need to have knowledge of the background attacks, right? How do you find the knowledge? How you can establish in a way the knowledge. So you go to the court, and of course the court has to prove the criteria. So the court has to say that you had knowledge of the background attacks.
So if there's any act that's done, say, in pursuance of some earlier done attack, or if there is, say, an intention to carry on an earlier done attack, then you can say that that person had some idea of the background attacks.
Okay. So it's contextual and it's mainly based on inferences. Okay. Of course, if there's a statement or whatever, that's easy thing. So it has to do with the time you do it, how you do it, the resources you are using, what you are targeting, etc. So to say that you have a knowledge, it's all these inferences that you have to make. So it's not always, scientific. It's based on evidence and inferences, etc. To say that you have knowledge. In order to prove that the attack is part of widespread or systematic attacks, it's again, you have to place it in an objective way within this systematic or widespread. So you have to consider actually when the attack was occasioned, if it was facilitated, you have to see the nature of the act, okay, and the means you're using, etc., to consider whether it was occasioned by the widespread or systematic attacks, whether it was facilitated by the widespread or systematic attacks. For example, if you commit a murder, right, and you committed the murder on the occasion of all the murders happening, right, and because you knew that the police would not intervene, etc., okay, so the widespread or systematic, okay, facilitated the murder. Now, if the police intervenes, okay, then it's a common matter. If you know that the police will intervene if they commit this murder, then it's a common murder. So it's not placed within the systematic or widespread attacks. So the question, what crimes against humanity try to do is to prevent people from entering, in this kind of criminality. Things happen, so I'm going to do stuff. Okay? So, and aggravate the situation of the victims. Because anything that you do which is part of a widespread or systematic attack aggravates the condition of the victims. Of course, for every crime there is a danger and there's an aggravation, but there is a kind of the standard danger and aggravation of the crime. Here we talk about additional, exacerbating. So it tries to prevent it. Okay. So place within the widespread or systematic attack is kind of facilitated, occasioned. So otherwise, to some extent, it wouldn't have happened, or it would have been different. Okay. Now, in the scenario here, what do you think? So it is systematic because it was mentioned. So you have organs of the state. Okay, so that's the organization. So the organization part, you have organs of the state that participate. Okay, it is, you have these 1,000 murders throughout the country, so it means that, it is a kind of pattern, organized. So you can satisfy the criterion of systematic, so it's the high criterion. Then you have to satisfy the lower threshold of multiplicity. So 1,000 killings may be a lot, well, may not be widespread, depends, you know, the targeted population, etc. But 1,000 killings, there are multiple, at least. Okay? There are many killings. Now, if you could satisfy the widespread, say that 1,000 killings were widespread, so 1,000 killings throughout the country is widespread, then you have to satisfy the lower threshold of some kind of organizational policy. And here, to the extent that you have the police involved, state, etc., you have this kind of organizational policy. Okay. Is it clear? Can you work on that? Do you want to have a 10 minutes break? Yes? No? There's a crime against humanity if I detain you. Now, if we take the two other scenarios and see whether any crime against humanity has been committed. So the Minister of Employment decides to stop paying the salaries of all utopian civil servants in ex-Utopia, and dystopian gangs enter one of the towns in the region and burn shops owned by utopians. Okay, so for crimes against humanity, the question is whether these specific acts, stop paying, etc., or burning shops, etc., satisfied. It's one of the acts in Article 7, and if the background is satisfied, then it will be a crime against humanity. Okay, so does it satisfy any of the acts in Article 7? And which one you think?
The act of the Minister of Employment can qualify as persecution when seen in the context, because it's discriminating against a certain group.
Good.
And in the larger context of the state-sponsored forces acting against a certain group, this sort of fits as persecution.
Yes. Okay. Now, persecution is a very kind of wide crime. Let me see now. Try to find persecution. So, persecution is any act, any violation of the acts in Article 7, or any other act which is done with discriminatory intent, becomes the act of persecution. So if you kill someone with discriminatory intent, so it's not the crime against humanity of murder, is persecution, the act of against humanity of persecution. Okay? Okay, so any act which is committed with discriminatory intent becomes the act of persecution. So here, it's a violation of human rights of people. It's about property rights. It's about livelihood, etc. And it's done with discriminatory intent. So the definition of persecution is against any identified group or collectivity on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender, as defined in paragraph 3, or other grounds that are universally recognized as impermissible under international law. So the important thing about persecution is the content, which can be very broad, can be all these acts with discriminatory intent, but any other act, violation with discriminatory intent against the background of widespread or systematic attacks, can be persecution. The grounds for discriminatory grounds are also very wide. So it's beyond the 4 grounds that we have for genocide. So it is political. So we don't have political groups under the definition of genocide, although there may have been discussions to have political groups. But attacks on political groups, imprisonment of members, or violations of the right to express, freedom of expression, or to demonstrate, etc. If there are with discriminatory intent, then this is persecution. Racial, we discussed it yesterday, national, ethnic, cultural. So we discussed yesterday about whether cultural groups should be under the definition of genocide. According to established views, they're not, but can be a crime against humanity. Religion, gender. Gender is a wider, of course, concept, and yesterday also we talked about whether gender groups can be within the definition of genocide. But it says gender is defined in Article 3, which is very limited. Okay, so it's kind of man, woman. So it's not gender as we understand, different kind of gender identifications. And the main reason is that Muslim countries would not sign it unless it was defined in a very limited fashion. So it's man and woman. Or it says any other grounds that are universally recognized as impermissible under international. So this is very open. Okay. The other characteristic then of persecution is that can adapt to kind of modern developments. But these other grounds, I mean, gender cannot be because it's defined specifically, but can be other grounds. I don't know what other grounds could be, but can you name any other ground which is not included here? Well, there may be in future, vertically impaired people or horizontally impaired people, whatever, it can be a lot of other grounds, but it has to be recognized in international law, which means that the court needs to establish in the first place whether discrimination on that basis is established in international law, and then it can go ahead to include it within the definition of persecution. Okay. So persecution has a lot of similarities with genocide because it's discriminatory intent. It doesn't have the additional intent to target a group. The grounds for persecution are wider than genocide, and the content, how you can persecute, is wider. It's not like genocide where you have these 5 acts, full stop. Here is any act or any violation with discriminatory intent, it is persecution. And then it is open-ended. It can include any other kind of violation on discriminatory grounds that have been recognized in international law. Now, what about the next? People from affected towns and municipalities leave their homes to move to other areas, but they are arrested for breaching dystopia's law not to relocate without permission. They are detained in a school where conditions of hygiene are very minimum. There is no medical care and food is rationed. So what kind of crime do you think is committed here? Crime against humanity. Sorry?
Deportation of
Sir?
Extermination.
Okay.
Deprivation of food.
Uh-huh. Okay, so people from affected towns and municipalities leave their homes to move to other areas. Okay. What is this? So they leave their homes to go to other areas. How you call that? Which, from the crimes, which crime is it? You mentioned deportation or forcible transfer. What is deportation? Deportation is across borders. Forcible transfer is within. Okay. So to the extent that it is within borders, that's forcible transfer. And forcible means what? Is it by using force? Yes, it's coercive. And coercive can be also because of the circumstances. Okay, it's not coercion because authorities, coerce people. It can be forced, can be non-forceful, etc. But by denying them, or by not taking action, by omitting to do things, or by doing stuff, etc., then they are forced, they are coerced to leave their homes. Okay, so you have forcible transfer of populations, coercive movement of population within the state. Okay. Now, this, if you go to the definitions in paragraph 2, it says deportation of forcible deportation of forcible transfer of population means forced displacement of the persons concerned by expulsion or other coercive acts from the area in which they are lawfully present without grounds permitted under international law. Okay. International law allows deportation and transfer, right? There are grounds, either for refugees, etc., where you deport. For example, if a refugee does not satisfy the criteria of refugee, then you deport. Now, there's also grounds for transfer of population, in particular during an armed conflict or occupation. So you can transfer people for security purposes. Okay. So in order to be a crime against humanity, it should not be justified by international law. So it should be kind of arbitrary. And one of the reasons that Israel has not signed up to the ICC statute is because of that. Israel's policy of transferring Palestinians within what's called the occupied territories. Okay. Of course, there is the background. The act is systematic because it's Israeli policy, the transfer, so the state is involved. And of course, you have multiplicity. There's a lot of people that have been transferred. I mean, you can say that also widespread. So it satisfies, however you want to define, it satisfies the criteria. And of course, Israel has been criticized for this policy, and a lot they say is crimes against humanity. But Israel says that if you apply occupation law, we are justified to do that for security purposes. So if you say that it's occupied territories, then there's reasons. But there's a lot of other moral, political reasons to criticize Israel. But that's one of the reasons that they haven't signed up to the ICC statute. Okay, so you have the transport or forcible transport. Then those people are detained, they're arrested for breaching dystopia's law not to relocate without permission. So is there any other of the crimes?
Extermination here in the second part of paragraph 4.
Okay, but before we go there, the fact that they're arrested for breaching dystopia's law, is there any, does it ring any bell?
Direct physical liberty.
Sorry?
Physical liberty is being restrained by not letting
The physical? Which part is that?
7-1,
Imprisonment. Okay, yeah. Imprisonment, rather severe deprivation of physical liberty in violation of fundamental rules of international law. Okay. Now, all the states, prisons, you know, it's part of state law, etc., and it's allowed in international law. So you detain, you can imprison people, etc., and it's domestic law, it's allowed by international law. So the whole issue here is whether the arrest, the detention, and the physical kind of arrest of the people for, according to the dystopia's law, is in accordance with international law. States may have certain laws that they say that, you know, you can not move through certain territory, or you, for security purposes, etc. So for all the laws, it may be lawful, and international law may allow derogations from certain kind of human rights. So the main question here is whether international law would allow it, whether it's proportional, and what are the reasons. Okay. If we go to the final part, so they're detained in a school, so again, it's imprisonment or severe deprivation of physical liberty, where conditions of hygiene are very minimum, there is no medical care, and food is rationed. So what could that be? Sorry?
Extermination.
Okay, extermination. So extermination, what is extermination then?
The deprivation of access to food and medicine,
Yeah.
calculated to bring about the destruction of a part of a body.
Yeah. Okay. So extermination is kind of someone is bombing. So extermination is a kind of massive murders. Okay. So you have a murder as a crime against humanity. Extermination is massive murders. Okay. So for extermination, for the crime against humanity, extermination, one person can commit the massive murders, call it massive murderers, okay? But also a person can commit one murder within a context of multiple murders against the background of widespread or systematic attacks. Extermination by itself can be widespread attacks. Okay? So one act can justify the background, but also be the specific crime against humanity, right? Or one act can be within a context of massive murders against a background of widespread or systematic attacks. It can be murders, can be anything else, right? If we go to the next one, In the detention center, Utopian women between the ages of 16 and 22 are detained separately, but in a room located next to the one where the other Utopian women are detained. Soldiers visit them regularly, engage in sexual intercourse. Their pleas, screams, and beatings can be heard by everyone.
Rape, sexual slavery.
Okay, sexual slavery. What's sexual slavery then? Slavery, what's slavery? Is the right of ownership on another person. Okay. You can buy, use, sell, whatever it is. But sexual slavery is for sexual purposes. Okay. Can it be something else as well? What else it can be? So they're visited by, well, it's not visited, based.
Bodily injury.
Okay. Ready? Before we go there. So, it can be, it says that they're visited and they're engaged in sexual intercourse, but you can hear the beatings, etc. So that can be rape. Okay. So how you define rape? So the crime against humanity of rape. Is the sexual invasion of the body, but there needs to be something else as well.
No consent.
No consent, or in a coercive environment. And I'm saying that because there can be difference, because the definition of crime, they talk about a coercive environment. Of course, from a coercive environment, you can deduct that there's no consent. They say that in a situation of violence, duress, detention, psychological oppression, abuse of power, etc. So this is a coercive environment. Okay. Now, you cannot deduct genuine consent, right, from a coercive environment. Okay. So this can be rape because of non-consensual, because of the coercive environment, sexual activity. What else? There's another thing here. So these things happen. Everyone can hear, the cries, the beatings, etc.
So inhuman act of causing great mental suffering in one case.
Exactly. Okay. So you have torture, but also you have in K, another open-ended provision is any inhumane act that can cause serious mental harm. So, okay, it can be serious, right? But it can be any act, and it's open-ended. So the fact that people are hearing all these things, that can cause to them mental harm. If it is severe mental harm, that can be torture. Okay. If you hear other people being tortured, right, that can cause you severe mental harm, and that's torture. You don't need, physically to be tortured in order to say that you have been tortured. The mental harm also is through external sources that they cause you mental harm. Or if it is below the level of severity, it's serious, then it's other inhumane acts. Okay.
So this act of causing mental harm by torturing someone physically, so this act can often lack the mens rea because you may not intend that this should be the effect that another person hearing will also be tortured. So how do we qualify this crime? Because this kind of a crime may lack mens rea, often it may not be foreseeable every time that this will have such an unintended effect, other than the person who's being physically.
Well, yes, I mean, but it is, it's at the end of the day, it's recklessness, so you don't have the intent to do that, but it is foreseeable that, if you do these things in a certain situation, then other people will be affected. So I don't think it's, from one act, you can have, in particular with violation of human rights, you can have a lot of other consequences of the act. One act can violate more than one human right. So in that sense, it is very much foreseeable, or unless you are completely reckless, well, you accept the result that, by doing that, the things will be hurt, etc. But I accepted that, the result. So it is reasonably within the actions you have committed. If we go to the next one, one day when soldiers visited their room, LL.M initiated sexual intercourse with one of the soldiers. Yeah, there's no, perhaps there's no consent. It's a coercive environment, if you like. So it's rape, again, because there's so there's no genuine consent, because of the coercive environment. So if you see your friends being raped, etc., whatever, so you just decide, instead of being beaten, whatever it is, then, I'll do it, but that's not genuine consent. Okay. The coercive environment within which you live kind of removes the genuineness of your consent.
But it says she initiated sexual intercourse.
Yes, but if you take it in a, it may be the case, yes, but it is not. But if you take it in a detention center, right, that these things happen, and your friends are beaten up or whatever, and then raped, etc. Is it genuine, your consent? You initiate, but I don't think it's my views. I don't think it's genuine, your consent. It's coercive. The coercive environment removes consent. but you can argue, of course, the people there, they're going by the opposite. Okay, but that was said there. Commander Lee brings 3 utopian women to his house, where he provides comfortable accommodation and food with a provision to do household chores.
Enslavement.
Okay. Why is it enslavement? Because they have comfortable environment.
So this is the traditional understanding of what enslavement is.
Sorry?
To provide comfortable food and accommodation and the provision to do household chores is against the traditional understanding of what enslavement is.
But there is a sense of ownership over these people, so I don't understand enslavement, even if you give them good conditions.
Yeah.
You might injustice someone.
What the others think?
So in this limited fact, that are given, I don't see any external manifestation of right of ownership being exerted. So how do we determine whether, for enslavement, whether Commander Lee has exerted any right of ownership over these persons?
Yeah, but would you agree to do it otherwise? In that situation, would you agree to do it otherwise? Would those 3 European women have gone to the house and that's the kind of ownership that there is. That situation created allows him to take that home and
Then would we consider Oscar Schindler as a person who enslaved Jews whom he saved from the camps and took to his factory? Because he also did. Sorry? He made them work in the factory. They worked in his factory. And I think
I think it's basically the idea of enslavement in general. It's probably coming in the way of the debate, inspired debate.
Well, I mean, of course, these are like moot court things. I mean, you can argue it both ways. But the ones that think it's enslavement, why they think it's enslavement, and the ones that think that it's not enslavement, why they think it's not enslavement. I mean, okay, I mean, the facts are very limited, but just to identify issues. So is there anything here to say that did they go with their own consent? Do they do the jobs because they want to do the jobs? Can they leave whenever they want, etc.? So these are some questions someone can ask whether it is slavery. If they went with their own consent, etc., they do the jobs, they are paid for the jobs, etc., then there can be a different argument. But enslavement includes human trafficking as well, okay? Or forced labor is included within enslavement. So, I mean, it's not only women, but mainly women or children that are trafficked. They were bought by the traffickers. They are kind of put in certain places where there are bunkers. They're contained there. They can be, they travel without the consent. They can be sold, or they can be kept in houses to prostitution, or that's enforced prostitution then. But they don't have any control over their destiny. Okay, their destiny is controlled by someone else. What about the last one?
Before we move to the last one, just one issue that the words comfortable accommodation and food generally does not go with whatever we think about when we think about the word of enslavement or slavery. However, going by the strict definition and the elements of crime given in the statute, there's no exception given in the definition of enslavement that if a good comfortable accommodation is provided or food is provided, then it would not amount to enslavement. So can we define this act of Commander Lee as enslavement in view of the fact that there is no exception to enslavement if you provide comfortable accommodation?
But the whole issue about enslavement is the ownership.
Yeah.
So the issue of whether you determine your destiny or whether someone else determines your destiny. So, yeah, I mean, you can argue both ways. I feel that it's enslavement. Others may very well think that it is not. But in that sense, even if you provide, you can take forced prostitution. It can be the best hotels. You can stay in the best hotels. Does it change things? You are controlled. And you have to do certain acts that, you haven't given your consent. The surroundings may be beautiful, etc. But it's not that you determine your destiny. What about the final one? Again, the issue of
Security concerns.
yeah.
The ground permissible under international law.
Yeah. So, is it the protection of transfer? What do you think? If it is within, it's transfer, forcible transfer. Forcible because of the circumstances, etc. It's not without consent. And even if the man said that, you're going to move because of the situation, if all these things happen, then it's not a genuine consent, so it's still forcible. Of course, for the others that they want to stay with their families, it's possible, obviously. And the whole question is whether it is allowed by the security reasons, whether it is allowed by international law. May be allowed, may not be allowed by international law. But if it is allowed, then it's fine. Okay.
So even if it's allowed, even if forced transfer in certain situations is allowed, would there not be an argument against that, the application of that exception to this case, because it's just men who are being transferred and not people as a whole? Because if there's a security threat, then it's to women and children also, and not just men of Utopian ethnicity.
Yeah, but you can make an argument that you have a war, and usually it sounds very kind of standardized, representations of men fight, women don't fight, love, peace, etc. But you can have an argument that if you have a war, for example, then two groups that they're not happy with each other, So they target men, etc. So you may say that's like moving men. It can be different reasons. So yes, I mean, don't try to, kind of find the real answer here. It's just for discussion
Because
purposes.
women are also being persecuted in this particular case. So it's not just men who are being targeted. So in that sense, with this context in mind, should we then not argue that it's not allowed by international law because it's just men, while everyone's being persecuted?
Yeah, it is discriminatory. So it's not allowed by international law. Fair enough. Now, some of the other crimes against humanity. Of course, there's the crime against humanity of sexual violence. So you see that there's a lot of things concerning kind of from rape, sexual violence, etc. So this is anything that violates the sexual autonomy of the person. Okay. Mutilation, asking people, to undress or to walk naked, etc. That could be one of them. You have enforced disappearances. It's Article 7(1)(I). So, enforced disappearances, does it ring any bell? Do you know in which area usually they were happening? It's Latin America, Argentina, Chile, etc., where people were disappearing, and of course they were never found. Of course, some of them, mainly children, but also others, and some of the children were given to families by the military regime. Some of them they were never found. So this specific crime reflects that situation. Okay. Then Article 7(1)(J) is what crime? And does it ring any bell, the same situation?
South Africa, and there have been allegations of the reverse happening in Zimbabwe as of now.
So, is there then, so it's a kind of racial discrimination, right? Mainly. Is any kind of racial discrimination then falls under this? I suppose, in India you have problems. In the United States there are problems. In the South. So the racial discrimination in the United States, say in the 60s up to the 70s, could it fall? Of course, you had South Africa, but there were a lot of other states that they had similar problems. So, would that in India? Do you have any similar problem? That's why India is not a part of the US.
Yes, it's
Other reasons.
also because of the enforced disappearances.
Really?
There have been allegations in Kashmir.
Okay. So the difference is that it should be an institutionalized regime of oppression and domination of one racial group against the other. And the act is to maintain the regime. So that is South Africa, because that was in South Africa where the regime was institutionalized, right? Whereas if you go to the United States, Of course, certain states may have these things, but as a federal state, the United States didn't have a regime of institutionalized racism. I mean, the Supreme Court, etc., they were against, or the federal government was against. Okay, so it kind of photographs one situation, mainly in South Africa. Now, whether Zimbabwe will move to that way, or is moving, is an institutionalized regime through the state structures are based on that kind of regime. Okay, so I think that was all actually. So we had to go quite quickly through the different crimes, but the main issue that you have to keep for crimes against humanity is that you, for someone to be prosecuted for a crime against humanity, the person needs to commit one of these acts, okay, against a background of widespread or systematic attacks against a civilian population with knowledge of the attacks. Okay, so there is the knowledge is the additional thing for crimes against humanity. And if you remember yesterday, I said about genocide that you have the double intent, and you have to prove it on the individual, that the individual had the intent to do the specific act plus to destroy the group, which is difficult to prove it, in particular the intent to destroy the group. So I said that there is another approach where you can have the intent, the collective intent or the government intent, etc., to destroy the group, the genocidal intent, and then for the specific act, the individual needs to have the knowledge of the background. Okay, in this way, the two crimes are coming together, and perhaps it's easier to prove genocide. Okay, so I'll finish here. So tomorrow is war crimes and the crime of aggression. And on Monday, we do Article 25, which is the participation, different ways of participating in the commission of crimes. You have the case studies and scenarios. I think it's good if you, before coming here, you go through, start thinking. Have Article 25 and Article 28 with you. And either we're going to have these groups where you present one of the scenarios, or we're going to do it like this, in a kind of impromptu discussion. Okay, thank you.